Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the class Advanced Method Schools. I'm Eman Chan from the Department of Public and International Affairs, but also the convener for this method school. And this is our third year. And basically, the method school want to bring interdisciplinary research, but also cutting-edge methods so that it can benefit our students and faculty. That was very much the design and our aim. So we are delighted today to have Professor Jeff GILL, distinguished professors of mathematics and government from American University, to give this keynote speech. And we are also very glad that we have the support from the university and also the college. So, and we were very glad to have Professor Wei Zhang, who is our associate provost in digital learning, renowned scientist in computer science and also electronic engineering. I think that very much reflects the cross-disciplinary aim of this platform. And without further ado, we will have Professor Zhang to give a welcome remark.
Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome to the class Advanced Method School, CAMS. Okay, CAMS from the College of Liberal Arts and Social Science is a branding initiative launched in 2022 to equip researchers and students with essential conceptual and technical competency for theoretical and empirical inquiries in social science research. The goal is to enhance the visibility of city university research while fostering a deeper understanding of advanced method. So this is really a great initiative, and on behalf of the CTO Provo office, we are really delighted to support this remarkable event. Let's give a warm welcome to all of you. Today, we are honored, deeply honored, to have Professor Jeff GILL with us, a distinguished expert in the social science discipline. He will be speaking on the AI, machine learning, and the impact on social science research. He is a pioneer in political science, health science, and data analytics. And we believe we're going to learn a lot from him today. And we were having a quick chat outside, and we couldn't stop because he's going to spend more time at CTU for the few days coming. So CAM provides this excellent platform for engaging with cutting-edge research. We see a lot of CTU colleagues here today, a lot of PhD students here today. So they are all specialized in big data analytics, natural language processing, and a lot of all these important skills can unlock the world insight and contribute meaningfully to our society. May I take this opportunity to deeply thank Professor Danny Yang and Professor Eman Zhang, and also all the class colleagues for their excellent hard work and dedication in preparing this summer school. Together to achieve such a great, remarkable milestone. Embrace this opportunity this is the moment that we work together to bring CTU class to the next level. So I would like to pass the stage to Professor Jeff GILL. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
We will have Professor Danny Yang to give a little bit of welcome as well to Professor Jeff GILL, and then we will, yeah.
Thank you, Eman. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this keynote speech to be delivered by Professor Jeff GILL. On behalf of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, I welcome you all to this signature event of our college Advanced Method School, in short, CAMS, as you could see from the logo on the right top corners. So in case this is your first time to hear about CAMS, please allow me to give you some brief background of our Advanced Method School. Our Advanced Method School is a branding initiative launched since 2022 in response to the surging demand for and interest in data-driven in the areas of liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences. In the past 2 years, a total of 30 events have been organized under the brand of CAMS, including keynote speeches, methods modules, seminars, and publication seminars. All of them focus on research design, methods training, and practical toolkits. This year, there are a total of 14 events under the brand of CAMS, including keynote speech to be delivered by Professor Jeff GILL, 3 method modules, 6 research seminars, 3 publication seminars, and 1 methodological workshop, running from April to June this year. These events are the joint effort of the 6 departments in our college, including the departments of Chinese and History, English, Media and Communication, Linguistics and Translation, Public and International Affairs, as well as my own department, Social and Behavioral Sciences. Today, we are very honored to have invited Professor Jeff GILL from American University to give us this keynote speech. He is also the founding director of the Center for Data Science and co-directs the Master in Data Science at the American University. He previously taught at Washington University and Harvard University. He is also currently the editor-in-chief of the Political Analysis, which is a top methodology journal in social science with the 5-year impact factors as 8.9. As Professor Zhang has mentioned, Professor GILL has extensive expertise in statistical computing, as well as applied Bayesian modeling and data analysis to different domains, including political behaviors, medical and clinical health, such as blood and circulation physiology, long-term mental health outcomes of children with exposure to war, as well as pediatric head trauma and analysis of events data. Today, Professor GILL will give us a talk on the topic connecting AI, machine learning, and social sciences. Through this talk, we'll be able to get more insight about how AI could be helping social science researchers in order to facilitate our data collection, data interpretation, as well as identify innovative ways in order to get some insightful solution to improve our well-being. In addition to today's keynote speech, Professor GILL will also deliver a publication seminar and a methodological workshop tomorrow morning and afternoon, respectively. So thanks again for everyone for joining this signature event. And now pass the ball to Professor GILL to give us the talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to tell you something you already know. We live in the AI or data century or whatever you want to call it. This is an incredible change in human history. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But things like our personal lives, our careers, things that affect our finances, our family, have never been more reliant upon data and the way we handle that. And this is imposed upon you whether you like it or not. Unless you want to go hide in the woods for the rest of your life, all of these things are imposed upon you because this is where human civilization is at. Here's something that I think people sometimes find surprising. Governments have mostly lost control of this process, okay? So many governments don't even try anymore. The government that tries the hardest is probably the European Union. In the United States, here's what happens. Mark Zuckerberg gets called in front of Congress once a year. He sits there with a smirk on his face while they say mean things to him. Then he gets back on his private jet and flies home to Palo Alto and doesn't even do anything about it. And that's kind of a regular event. And it's because governments have mostly lost control over this. So thinking about this in terms of human history, I like thinking about this in terms of human history. We're, as a species, only about 200,000 years old. Now, I say that roughly because it kind of depends on which anthropologist you talk to, so they need to argue a little bit about that, but it's roughly 200,000 years old. And whereas the Earth, as you see, is about 4.5 billion years old. By the way, this is one of the reasons I hate the phrase save the Earth. The Earth is going to be fine. It's got another 4 billion years left. It's us we need to save, right? And the other animals and plants and whatnot. So we're in the middle of the 5th major revolution in human history. So, as you see here, there was the Upper Paleolithic, right? The Neolithic, the second agricultural, the Industrial Revolution, which I have a surprisingly precise start to, 1712. Does anybody know what happened in 1712 in England? the steam engine was invented, right? So that's the only one we have an exact date for. And so we're now, I am calling it the information revolution. I've changed my mind on this title about 3 times, but we're in the middle of the data science, information, AI revolution, okay? This point I think is really important. Here's my, so that's kind of weird. People in the middle of a human revolution are typically not aware they're in the middle of a human revolution. They're just trying to feed their families and survive and plant things and whatnot. So like if you walk around campus or you go anywhere and you start asking people, are you aware that you're in the middle of the 5th major revolution in human history? They're going to say, what are you talking about, right? But the truth is we are in the middle of this revolution, and things are changing faster than ever before. I'm going to be more specific about that. So I believe that the 21st century is going to be the century where gigantic leaps are going to be made in the social and biomedical sciences. Now think about the 20th century for a minute, okay? The 20th century was characterized by huge advances in physics, engineering, and chemistry. Okay? And the list of things that they did is phenomenal. And if you think about what humans were doing in the year 1900 relative to the year 2000, it's a dramatic change propelled by those fields. Okay? But it turns out, ironically, that we need computers more than they did. Okay? The computer wasn't really invented until after World War II, right? The programmable computer. And those fields were making gigantic leaps with very primitive computing. We sent men to the moon in a metal can, okay, based on calculations made by a computer that was dumber than 2 game consoles today, okay? And people willingly did that, which is interesting. So what's going to happen is this century, because we need computers more than they do, and we have them now, and they're powerful. Under my desk is the 2nd most powerful computer at my university. And I'm really annoyed about that because it's 2nd. I'm working on that, by the way. But what I'm saying is if you think about the type of work we're increasingly, I'm going to be specific, doing as social scientists, and the way we process large data sets now, and the way we need advanced computing, things like Markov chain Monte Carlo and other processes that I use every day, we couldn't do this 30 years ago. Now, if you talk to a geneticist, it's even a more dramatic change, right? I mean, they have 3.2 billion base pairs to worry about, right? What I love about genetics is it's the anti-physics, by the way. So in physics, and I love when they talk about this, they don't know where the bottom of the rabbit hole is. You know that analogy from Lewis Carroll? It's dark matter. No, it's string theory. No, it's something else. In genetics, they know exactly where the bottom of the rabbit hole is. It's 4 molecules. And there's never going to be a lower part of the rabbit hole. It's an incredibly complicated bottom of the rabbit hole, but they know exactly where it is, right? And it's computation that drives their progress. So things like data access and data analysis that we do increasingly on a large scale are going to be critical as we progress through the 21st century. When I say we, I mostly mean social scientists. Things like integrating different types of data is going to be increasingly important. And I'm going to talk about the last bullet point for a long time. So the one thing that sort of characterized the era that I've been in the academy is when I started as a grad student, data was a rectangular file and a PDF codebook, almost invariably, right? And you would download those things, and that's all you needed. But today, progress is being, in the social sciences, there are people using genetic, genomic data, digital video, as you see here, GIS, imaging, sensor data. Studying internet traffic is a really interesting challenge as a mechanism of communication. Mobile phone tracing, and all the detailed personal information that we probably don't want out there, but is out there. And of course, unstructured text is probably the sexiest thing political methodologists think they're doing right now. And so, we're moving to these new sources of data that I've listed here. I'm not going to repeat them, that we didn't use 25, 30 years ago as a sociologist, psychologist, political scientist. And note that these are both qualitative and quantitative. And so this is where AIs, continue to talk about gets really powerful, right? Is they be able to exploit different and complex types of data. So I want to go through some numbers today, and these are kind of surprising in their scale. And I updated these a month or so ago, so they're already wrong, but they're close. So these numbers are every day, 23 billion text messages, okay? A little over 9 billion searches. I love this stat, almost 100,000 on Google per second around the world. 500 million tweets, 347.3 billion emails. I'm going to talk about data size. 4 petabytes of data are created on Facebook every day. 4 terabytes from each connected car. If you own a car built in the last 10 years, roughly speaking, it is sending everything it does back to the manufacturer, okay? Like everything you do with that car, where it goes, how fast it goes, how hard you brake, right? All of these data from that car are being sent back to Ford or Hyundai or whatever, right? The car companies haven't quite figured out how to monetize that in a big way yet, but it's going to go to insurance companies, almost certainly, okay? Whether you like it or not, my code phrase from an earlier slide. 65 billion WhatsApp messages, 360 terabytes every day uploaded to YouTube, most of that junk, of course. I talked about autos, that's a repeat. More than 100 billion, that's a repeat too. See, this is what I updated. This is the old one from 6 months ago, and this is from about a month ago. So that tells you how fast these numbers can change. A little repetition there. 21.6 GIFs sent via Facebook Messenger. 282 billion spam emails every day around the world. I feel like I get half of those, you know? That's a lot of spam, right? 220 million Skype calls. And you know, Skype isn't even as popular as it used to be. I need a Zoom statistic on here. Venmo, if you know what that is, processes 75 million peer-to-peer transactions. This one's the amazing one right here. And it's amazing for a weird reason. So the Weather Channel, 4 times 10 to the 10 forecast requests. The overwhelming majority of those are other computers asking the Weather Channel, not humans, right? Because you know you can get the weather from many, many sources. 65 million Uber bookings. So the average online person, meaning everybody in this room, right, generates 10 to the 18 bytes of data every day. Inadvertently, you walk by a camera, a digital camera, the things you do online on your computer get propagated and sent out, whether you like it or not, right? This is in social science, but I just love this statistic. When the CERN Large Hadron Collider is in operation, which is not every day, it generates 864 zettabytes of data. To show you what that means in scale, a zettabyte is 1,000 times 10 to the 7, right? So these you know, right? You know, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, we use those terms every day. Petabytes, I'm sure you've heard of. So humans are moving up this scale, right? And they have funny names that are going to be in the lexicon soon because we're doing that. So you go from exabytes to zettabytes to yottabytes, brontobytes, geobytes, zotzabytes, and finally chomsbytes. I have no idea where these names came from. I tried to find out. But as you can see, we are clearly, I'm going to give more statistics, dealing with bigger and bigger data sets. So I just discovered this the other day. I wasn't actually shopping for this, but for $200 in the US, I could get, where is it, a 14 terabyte hard drive. Unbelievable, for $200. Now, the one down there is funny. My first personal computer came with a 10 megabyte hard drive, and I thought that was like all you would need in the world, right? 10 megabytes. I mean, I have data sets way bigger than that now, a single data set. So Amazon will solve my problems, right? So a question I get asked all the time is, what is big data, right? And it's a little more subtle than it sounds, right? So the first answer is the glib one. It's whatever anyone wants it to be, right? I can call anything big data, there's no cost. The classic definition, which you've probably heard, is volume, variety, velocity, value. I didn't say all that right, but you get the idea. You know, how much, how different is it, how fast does it come at you, how much is it worth, and how true is it, right? But it sounds sexier when you use all those V terms. Here's my definition. My definition is big data is big enough to challenge the existing analytical tools that you have. Okay? So by my definition, humans, I should say, be fair about that, humans have always been in a big data era. So the abacus, we think it was invented about 30,000 years ago in the Middle East, okay, because they were making transactions in the market, in the bazaar. And the data for pricing things was getting too big to keep in their heads, so they invented this little, you know what an abacus is, right? Or am I dating myself? It's got little beads on little wires and you move them around. Yeah, okay. If you're less than 30, you probably haven't seen an abacus, but that's okay. So they were in a big data era 30,000 years ago. And they solved that particular problem, by a new tool, a computer, if you like. So we've always been in this big data era. It's just that the big data gets bigger. So the current digital universe is 44 zettabytes. So where are my zettabytes? Sorry, wrong direction. Darn it. Now I'm ruining all my drama. Zettabytes, we're here, right? So that's impressive. So what are the current abacuses that we use? Some of this you obviously know. Another question I get asked all the time is, what is machine learning? Right? And the journalists, the press, they find this very sexy. It uses a term. I wish they were all here to see the next couple slides. It's really a set of tools for classification. And it's not even a very new set of tools for classification for the most part. I mean, some of them, like Logit is considered a machine learning tool, right? Logit was invented in the 50s, I think. So the difference is that most machine learning tools are tools for classification. That's the next slide where I ruin my drama. And it turns out this name isn't even very new. It comes from 1959. My favorite definition of machine learning is this one right here. So a computer program is said to learn from experience E with regard to some class of tasks T and performance measure P if the performance at task T as measured by P improves with experience E. That's a little wordy, but I love the precision of that sentence. I think that's really neat. And of course, you know, this has been we've been using this phrase and using these tools for quite some time now, so they're embedded in the commercial world to a huge extent, right? Fraud detection, self-driving cars, they haven't gotten a very good reputation lately, at least in the United States. And so previously, like up until about the 70s, everything was a set of rule-based that humans would program into a computer where there was no learning, and it was still called AI. And then there was this sort of dark period around that time where AI wasn't progressing. It's interesting in a history of science sort of context. But like the big contrast, so I'm trained as a statistician, the big contrast, I think, is not in the tools that they use, but the way they're used and the way they're considered between conventional statistical analysis and machine learning. So in classic statistics, which you all know, you have data and you have rules. And the rules are, oh, well, if I have a dichotomous outcome variable and I want to do a regression, I'm going to do a logit, probit, or C-log-log link function, and that's the recipe, right? So we have, you take these stat courses because you want to accumulate the rules, right? What's appropriate for categorical data versus interval measured data and so on and so forth. Then we turn the crank of estimation and we get answers, right? We get regression coefficients or something like, or t-statistics, whatever. Now, the real difference is, and keep in mind, these are tools that were invented mostly by statisticians, Maybe not neural networks, but certainly regularization, logit, and random forests and whatnot. You input data and the answers, the truth, the outcome. You turn the machine learning crank, and what you get is a set of rules. And then you take those rules and you apply it to another data set, okay? So this is the training part. But you see that philosophically, there is a difference in classic statistical analysis and this machine learning idea. And yet, they're still the same sorts of physical methods. And of course, there's a big distinction between supervised and unsupervised. Well, supervised learning is very close to classic statistics. That is, I have some outcome variable y, I have some feature variables, explanatory variables x, and I want to produce the best rule, right, f of x equal y. So big F could be logit, it could be random forest, whatever, but it's my job to find the best f. Whereas unsupervised learning, I have this target y still, but I want the computer to do some work to figure out how I'm going to produce a set of rules after the process goes. Okay, and you know this is kind of a slightly overstated difference, but these terms get used all the time because there are hybrids. There are algorithms that are both supervised and unsupervised in different contexts. So the next question I get asked all the time is, what is AI, right? You know, AI, as I mentioned, was born a long time ago as an idea, right? And of course, science fiction writers took off with it, which is kind of funny. But really what it is an umbrella for a lot of other tools. You know, machine learning, deep learning, which I'm going to talk about today, natural language processing, and that's an oversimplification. But I ran that graph by the chair of computer science at my university, and she was okay with it. So that's just the way I think. So what I think is really helpful is this is like popping open the hood of the car and looking at the engine here, is to think what is really going on when you use ChatGPT or some other technology. And the core fundamental transaction is that graph right there, okay? And it's much simpler than what goes on, but it's the fundamental structure of what goes on, okay? By the way, it's not modeled after brain functions. It just reminded people of that. And it's not the greatest name in the world because of that. It's not biological is what I'm saying. So what we have is we have some input, data, okay? And then data informs some nodes at first, okay? Great. I mean, you're going to see it gets much more complicated, but let's just keep it. This is the core unit. So you have two nodes here, okay? And what the training algorithms do is they give the information in those nodes weights. And I'll be more specific about that in a minute. And then we sum up the value of that information times the weights, okay? And we sum it and we get a new number, okay? And we take that new number in this new node, I'll be more specific, and we have what's called an activation function. And the activation function, basically, it's just a function. One of them, the very popular one, looks like a logit curve. That's a decision about whether the summed information from the summed weighted information from the previous nodes is important enough to transmit to another node, or nodes, plural. Okay? So the very atomic substructure is just this idea of information gets weighted by an algorithm in the training process. We sum it and we decide how important it is. And then we do this billions of times in a structure that I'll show you momentarily. I'm perfectly happy to take questions or interruptions or objections as we go through. So an important feature of neural nets is that they're black box, and I know you've heard that before. What I mean by that is really specific, though. If you pull out a single step of a neural net, okay, it's not interpretable. The only way you can interpret it is to look at the previous step and the future step and see how it's changing information between the previous and the future step. But wait a minute, then you have to do that to the future step to understand what that means, and the future step, and the future step, and the future step. So unlike a regular, maybe an algorithm you might write in R or C++ or something like that, where you print out intermediate steps to kind of see how you're doing, it makes no sense to pull out a single step from a neural net. It just doesn't inform you about anything. So we call that black box, meaning the entry point and the exit point are the interpretations. So to be more graphical about that, the simplest one I could think of, so we have 3 inputs here that come from the initial data. They're going to get weighted, and then they're going to go to another node. Okay, that's obviously way too simplified. So what we do in the process that you saw me do with the weighting and just the 2 nodes is we go to the first hidden layer. Okay, and what I meant a minute ago about does it make sense to pull these things out? I'm pulling out. I was talking about pulling out a row here. I'm going to turn them into columns in a minute. But we have this hidden layer, okay? And so you see that it's possible for the information in this node to influence the information going to any of the 3 hidden nodes here, okay? And it could be it doesn't matter here, but it matters a lot there. And then the hidden nodes inform an output node in this very oversimplified analogy. So now think about many hidden nodes. In this case, I just had 2. So we have this information goes to a hidden layer. It gets processed there, and then per my first graph, this information gets weighted and has the ability to go to any of the nodes in the next hidden layer. Okay? So pretty simple structure so far. The problem is, and I'll show you a graphic that is indicative of that, in the big LLMs, large language models that exist today, there can be hundreds of thousands or millions of these nodes, and there can be hundreds of thousands of hidden layers. So you can see now, what does it mean when you pull out a hidden layer and look at the structure? It means nothing to you. You can't work with it. But the nice part about this, and this is one of the advances, is it's still a gigantic matrix algebra problem, and we know a lot about how to work with those. Now, I'm going to add the transaction information layer. So going back to my first diagram, so here's the incoming initial data going to a set of nodes. They inform or not by weighting on these paths their information, and then they go to this transaction layer node, and this is where there's that function that decides how important that information is. Okay, that is, the activation function says, oh, this is valuable to me, right? And then passes it along maybe to other nodes, right? Any of the 3 here, or this information is a dead end, and I'm going to kill it. So maybe that path there just doesn't matter. But it could be that the path from this one and this one matter a lot for that node, even though this one doesn't, okay? So here's an example. Now, so the original data is like a 28 by 28 pixel image. This is like neural net 101, right? When you're doing something like this. And that's the incoming data, and it goes to an input layer where that's the first one here. And what this layer is, it breaks it up into what could potentially be important information. Now, you and I can look at that, and we all know it's the number 4, but the computer doesn't necessarily know that without a neural net or some other algorithm, right? So what this means is these are some important points on the upper end of the graph or image. These are some important points in the lower image. Here's a fuzzy representation of the whole thing. And here are some diagonal left to right lines that are important. So each one of these represents a different kind of information. Now, it could be, say, that this, I'm just picking this randomly, that this particular node is not important, right? So it would get, the activation function would zero it out before it got to the structure of the next layer here. Does that make sense? And then, through a process of doing this over and over again, the machine finally gets to a point where it decides, oh, that's the number 4. right? It's got 10 choices as an output, and if it processes correctly, it assigns it to the digital discrete number 4 out of the set of categorical alternatives. Okay, as I've been implying, there's a training process. Then we test it on other data. So we might train it on some numbers and test it on some letters or something like that. At the end of that, what we get is a set of values that we know in the training. That's the vector y, and a set of predictions, the y hats. And so what we care about is the vector difference between the y's and the y hats. So I just talked about a very forward-looking process. It turns out that the big breakthrough, which I have on the next slide, is a forward-looking process and then a backward-looking process. So if our goal is in minimizing y minus y hat, we need to add a little bit more vocabulary or technology here. So we have some information in X or however, whatever data we get. We know what the class of the top is. So that is, in the graphs that I've shown, it's 0 through 9, 10 digits, right? So K would be 10. And so we could talk about different numbers of hidden layers and so on and so forth. I talked about the activation function. It's usually denoted little sigma there. So what all this sets up is talking about deep learning now, right? Deep learning is a relatively new implementation of neural nets, but the number of layers can be huge, okay? So what we want to do is establish a set of optimal weights such that y minus y hat for the training phase is as small as possible. So this is why it took 7 years to train ChatGPT 3, right? Which means by the time you're done, they were done in that case, right? It was antiquated information to some extent. We'll talk about some of those problems in a minute. So some of the achievements are impressive so far of deep learning. So near human image classification, speech transcription, so on and so forth. It turns out we created machinery that plays Go and chess better than any human. Like they beat masters of Go and masters of chess. They're just better at that. So here's an illustration I love from a great book, by the way. Suppose you had 784 initial data points, nodes. That's 28 times 28 from a pixelization, right? And so here we have the authors. I was going to make my own, but I like this one so much, I'm just going to use theirs. So let's say we have 16 nodes in the first hidden layer. Now, these are all the ways that 784 information points, 0 ones actually, can inform the first hidden layer. And it's vast, right? And then this is all the ways that the first layer can inform the second layer. And this is all the ways that the second layer can inform the prediction, the y hat. So this is a set of zeros, except there's a 1 in one of these places. That's the prediction. Okay, so that's an impressively big number of things relative to the really simple diagrams I started with. And that's a pretty simple problem, okay? The cool thing is, this paper here in '86 changed everything, okay? Because it invented back propagation. And I'll be really a little bit vague about it, but the idea is we run the weighting process forward, okay? Then we get a y minus y hat. And by the way, we keep track of every possible path between every node of every hidden layer. Then we get to y minus y hat. And the idea is then we go backwards and we adjust the weights going backwards. And it's using what's called gradient descent, which is basically a first derivative in calculus. And we use it's a nested set of decisions. It's serial. So we have to use the chain rule going backwards. And this paper was such a breakthrough, it won the Turing Prize, which is basically the Nobel Prize for computer scientists. Because Alfred Nobel lived before there was computer science. So that's the biggest honor you can have in that world. And so this paper changed everything, except even though it won the Turing Prize, it took us a while to realize the power of backpropagation and have the computing resources to exploit it properly. Now think about the young people in the room, you don't think about this. The older people in the room like me, I remember computing in the 80s, right? That was when faculty, I wasn't faculty, first had like a PC on their desk. And you didn't have to take a bunch of cardboard things over to the computer lab, right? Or worse, paper tape and a roll up. And I'm fortunately after that era, but I read about it. This I basically already described. I'm just going to skip it for so it goes forward. It does the process I mentioned. And then it gets a y minus y hat. And then it goes backwards. And the whole idea is I'm going through every one of those edges between a node. And I'm optimizing using a first derivative the difference, minimizing the difference between y and y hat for that edge. And I'm doing it for every edge between every node and every hidden layer. That's why it took 7 years to train ChatGPT 3, right? So now returning to this, instead of 784, which is already complicated in 2 hidden layers, right? Imagine we had millions of inputs, right? And we had hundreds of thousands or more hidden layers, right? That's where we are today. And so this little technical aside I find to be important because it gives us an appreciation for how the thing is working under the hood. Okay, so this I'm going to go through quickly because this is mostly stuff everyone knows. Basically, you know, we had this 2022 rollout of chat, the first really interesting ChatGPT. They actually failed a number of times beforehand, by the way. And you know, now we have alternatives. And just this week, right, I read day before yesterday in an airport, and you know, Apple's rolling out its new LLM strategy, and which is really interesting because they're going to put it inside regular applications, right? Like Amazon puts it in AWS, and you have to use AWS to use theirs. And ChatGPT is, I think, a better model. You use 3.5 these days, or if you want to pay a little money, use 4. But it's going to be interesting to see how these different tech giants roll out the new processes, the new algorithms. This, I think, that's in ChatGPT. It was trained on 12 trillion individual tokens. That's that first column in the graph we just saw. But there's an interesting thing that's going on, and I don't think this is appreciated by journalists at all. There's actually a problem if you work in that world, which is there is not enough reliable data out there. It sounds like, you know, we're thinking, oh, there's so much data out there. Most of what an algorithm that does the training in the way that I just described goes through the internet. Most of the information is junk, right? It's lies, it's wrong, it's fuzzy. And so there's a real problem if you're working in this world with getting high quality, trustable input data, right? And you've read some of the problems that result if you don't do that, right? I mean, the bias is famous in a lot of these. I just read that there's an article recently, like this week. There's a company who tests the big LLMs for bad things you can do. And they found that with several of them, you can ask it, say, I want to design a biological or chemical bomb. And it will comply. Right? That was just this week that was that. So, or I want a procedure for hacking into major companies, and some of them complied. Here's the steps, right? So this is a problem. I love this term that sometimes it hallucinates, it makes up stuff. That's just a great analogy. So I think, other things are, we know that all statistical models are subjective. Therefore, I think it's a bad idea to turn over a general statistical model to an LLM. Maybe that's prejudice as a statistician. And of course, that relates to garbage in, garbage out. And I do worry a little bit about elitism, particularly in an academic setting, where wealthy universities, wealthy departments, wealthy centers have the ability to use this technology in sophisticated and useful ways. And I'm probably being a little American-centered here. And some of the more financially challenged universities in my country will not be able to do that. And humans have this tendency, going back to my anthropological stuff, they have this tendency to do that with income, with resources, with political power. We tend to be very asymmetric if we have the opportunity. So like in every country, wealth has roughly the same, if it's cattle in some country, if it's money in some country, there's always like a chi-square looking thing with 1 degree of freedom. There's always an upper tail of people. And I think that might be where we're headed with this. Wow, that's a busy slide. So this is a Rob Francis style slide is what that is. If you were in his talk, you know what I mean. So I think in terms of like social scientists doing research, there's some interesting contrasts. So the best thing that we're going to see now in the next few years is us using AI to do big amounts of really boring stuff, right? Normally I give that to my RAs. That's almost a joke. So the first thing AI is going to do, both academically and in industry and government, it's going to replace humans at the very low level of the data manipulation pyramid, right? Cleaning up dirty data, things of that nature, filtering out unimportant variables, and so on and so forth. I do not think AI for causal inference is going to happen in a meaningful way in the next few years. But it's a very active area of research. I enjoy reading the papers, but there's a lot of things to be worked out there. But I think what we're going to see is improvement as academics and things we can ask it over the next, say, big improvements over the next 5 years. Give me two competing theories about the political economy of Greece-Turkey relations, right? I don't think we can say create a formal mathematical model of trade between Greece and Turkey. I don't think LLMs or AI is there quite yet. When I say we can't do it, I mean the results are going to be not useful. So going on with what we can do, I think we're going to replace a lot of the boring things that I used to make graduate students do. I also think, and where's Ed? There's Ed. That we're going to see AI, in fact, you can do it today, replace literature reviews, right? Ed and I were talking yesterday, at least in political science and most of the social sciences, I hate literature reviews. In many of the natural sciences, they don't have them. In other words, if you don't know this literature, don't read this article, right? But we make ourselves do this. I'm a journal editor. And reviewers will say, well, you didn't cover the important part of the literature that I care about, right? I hate that. The other part I hate is the paragraphs after the regression table, which they also don't do in a lot of natural science journals. You know what I'm talking about. Notice that ideology is significant and positive. That means that as people get more conservative, they tend to vote this way. Please, if we could get rid of those two things, we could publish more articles, right? And junior people could have more publications. But there's some things that we can do today with NLP and other things. Create large data sets of simulated data. That's already being done. My journal, Political Analysis, published one a year and a half ago. I actually didn't think it was right, but I wanted to start the conversation, so I accepted it. And it's gotten actually some journalistic attention as well. So what are the sort of things we're doing in the social sciences today? And this is not meant to be advice or anything. Things that I've noticed in these fields. For political science, pre-processing big data sets, simulating behavior. Like in PA, I think this is interesting. You know, you can't experiment with governments, right? You can't say, Mexico, I want you to do this, right? And Guatemala, I want you to do that because I want to see what happens when you do that, right? But you can do some really interesting simulations with existing AI. Kind of the same thing with economics. There's an interesting literature in sociology I'm fascinated by, where they create artificial social groups. And then they see how those social groups interact. Isn't that cool? Anthropology, how many ways can you go from this variant of a species to a new or current variant of species? And I think in statistics, some nice things I've been seeing is suggesting but not necessarily requiring certain model types, dealing with lots of hypotheses, data cleanup and things like that. I'm actually writing about some of this. I have a book project called Help, I Have Dirty Data. Things you have to do between data arrival and modeling. And when I wrote the prospectus, I said there's going to be no AI in there. Now I think it's going to be half AI because some of these have really evolved recently. I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time. I just love this, okay? If you have time, find this paper. It's not hard. Google Scholar or something. And I'd love the way they talk about how we in the social sciences can and are using AI tools in our literature. And the big division is AI for social science and social science of AI. And that sounds like it's the same thing, but their definition is not. So AI for social science, it's doing very mechanical things for you, okay? Hypothesis generation, survey research. Social science of AI is actually going into the fields and looking at the questions. So it's sort of like going in different directions with a causality arrow. I really recommend that paper if you're interested. So journal scholarship. If you haven't noticed, the way journal scholarship has been done in the last 50 years or so is antiquated and going away. Okay? So academic journals were created, as you see here, in the 17th century because at the time, it took ages to print a book, right? And this is mostly, no, it's almost strictly in Europe at the time. And they wanted a way to get scientific information out quickly without having to wait a year or so for a book to be physically bound by a non-machine process, by human hands. So there's a couple things that are going on. If you're a social scientist and you are doing research in AI in your field, you need to be aware that computer scientists publish way faster than you do because of the structure of our journals, okay? Not only that, there's more of them. So if you're competing against people that can get material published in months rather than years, that's a difficult place to be in. And I've seen people like absolutely get burned by this process. That is, they start a project from a social science perspective that uses AI, and by the time it's through the review process, there's 3 computer science papers out there that did the same thing. And I'm not making that up. I'd give you more anecdotes, but we probably don't have time. And we are sort of changing already with things like archive. And as I was saying yesterday to Ed, the model where we give a product for free to a corporation, and that corporation sells our product back to our university library, is definitely going away, right? And universities are rebelling against that. I don't know if you read this. The University of California system, which has a lot of weight, across 10 campuses, had renegotiated all of their library contracts with all of the publishers. And they basically said, we're fed up with this model, which is great. Not every university system has the power of the University of California. And then here's a thought experiment. And I don't have the answer. I have ideas. Suppose an author, I'm going to put that in quotes, said to a very sophisticated AI LLM structure, I want you to produce a groundbreaking result in this literature, okay, and gave it a set of criteria in that literature, whatever you can imagine in your literature, and then didn't write the paper after that, just took those results and submitted it to a journal. How would you feel about that as an editor? And I'm talking about, like, the result is actually groundbreaking, okay? Suppose the result was, this prevents that cancer, right? You drink 10 glasses of grapefruit juice every day and you won't get prostate cancer. Yeah, I'm just making that up. And so the result is groundbreaking in whatever literature, but the AI created it. Now, wait a minute. You can't ignore the result if it's actually groundbreaking, but how do you treat that as science, right? Like, are we at the point where we don't need humans to create science? I'm not sure we're there now. In fact, I'm pretty sure we aren't, but we're going to get there. Do we say, oh, this piece of software is the author, and then the appendix just said, Jeff asked it to do these 10 things. And wow, it went and did those 10 things and had a groundbreaking result. Or do we say, oh no, that doesn't count because it wasn't an actual researcher or human, and we throw that result away and we say, well, some researcher will do it in 10 years, right? It's an interesting thought experiment. Now, these issues are going to affect junior scholars more than senior scholars, right? I love this because I read this. I wasn't like around at the time. But when hand calculators first came out in the 60s and 70s, math teachers freaked out. Because what is it going to do? It's going to make people lazy and dumb. And they won't be able to divide 179 by 4. You know, things like that. It didn't change. In fact, it made people more efficient, right? I don't need to divide 179 by 4 by hand. I have this thing called R or Python, right? Maybe I'm being lazy, I don't know. So like, it just made these cumbersome things less cumbersome, right? Clearly there's going to be a point in time where that's acceptable for AI, right? So, you know, if a high school student writes a term paper with the help of AI, it's not going to be considered cheating, right, at some point. But I think it's really important to understand the inner workings and how they can go wrong, which is why I had that technical section. So I think there's really 2 skills involved here. One is how to use actual packages, programs, LLMs, AI algorithms, and the other is to understand what's going on under the hood. And I think the latter is critical to being effective here, because the garbage in, garbage out, right? And so, you know, I grew up in California, so there's an old surfer's adage, and I don't mean a web surfer, I mean like an actual ocean surfer, which is ride the wave or be crushed by it. And I really think that's true here. Almost finally, this is going to change teaching a lot for us, right? So think about this for a second. The freshmen, the 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds you're going to be teaching in the fall, they never knew life without the internet. They never knew life without mobile technology, sophisticated mobile technology, right? 9/11, that's an American example. The end of the first Cold War. If you haven't noticed, we have a new one. You know, 24-hour news. I mean, they live in a world that's very different than the one that I lived in as a 17 or 18-year-old. And it means also they're sitting in the classroom fact-checking you all the time, if they're not texting their friends, right? But the thing is, not everything that they find as a fact is a fact, right? Because I talked about the preponderance of evidence of information on the internet relative to what we're talking about today is garbage. But they're going to have a fundamentally different college experience than even people 5, 10 years ago. And so there's a new trend, and if you talk to administrators, I think they consider this positive. So ChatGPT was released November 2022. Administrators at my university and other universities I knew of, they spent the spring semester freaking out, right? Department chairs, deans, whatever. Oh my God, we've got this thing now where all of our students are going to cheat, essentially. And then I think I give them credit. Shortly thereafter, there was this idea that, wait a minute, maybe this is more like the hand calculator than it is the cheating tool. And so I was talking this morning. Business schools actually are on the forefront of this in terms of curriculum, at least in the United States. So my business school, in the fall, every undergraduate course will have an AI component to it in the curriculum. Every single one. And the reason is, that's what employers are telling them they want from the graduates. Now, business schools are interesting because they have clients, they have customers in a way that lots of other disciplines don't, right? I don't think about the customers so much for a PhD student in statistics, right? They're going to go do whatever they want. But business schools are, they're also ranked and evaluated on this. So they're listening to the employers, and the employers are saying, we want your finance students to be AI savvy. We want your marketing students to be AI savvy, or we're going to hire somebody else's. And so that's a really interesting development because of the market that they live in. I'm going to be real short on this because I want some time for discussion. But there's a lot of ethical considerations to consider. AI can create fake humans, fake photos, fake data, fake pornography, fake information. This is always going to be a problem. There are increasingly sophisticated detectors of that, but that doesn't mean lots of people are going to be using them, right? So the big issues that people that worry about this think about are harmful inclusion and harmful exclusion, right? Things that get in. Now think about this for a second. This is a good backup. When you run the training process, you run the weighting forward. You get a y minus y hat. You do back propagation to tune it, to optimize it, right? There's nothing in that process that says if there's something bad that's negative on humans, then I'm gonna exclude it. Because the only criteria is mathematically decreasing the vector y minus y hat. So when you see in the media that something happens, somebody uses ChatGPT and it tells you that a certain group in society is more likely to commit crimes, and that's just wildly racist and wrong, they have to go back in and mechanically reconfigure stuff. Because that wasn't a criteria when they trained these algorithms to begin with, right? Or leaving stuff out for the same reason. I'm just saying the training process is a mathematical process that doesn't care about the consequences. So we have to care about the consequences. So why does this happen? Fixation with the newest, latest, greatest thing. This I already said. Reporting problems and so on and so forth. I'm going to skip to the end. And just say that those are a bunch of ethical issues that are important to think about either as consumers or producers of this technology. And it'll never stop.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for really giving this fascinating and inspiring talk. I mean, we talk so much about, like your analogy, which is probably also a real-life example that whether as journal editors we should accept a paper generated by AI. And I think that actually points to a lot of things about authorship, about how we embrace this kind of technological change. And I remember my first answer to you was that, well, we probably have to ask the right question as of the technological development at this point. And that's certainly some sort of human agency in it. But as the talk you just gave, I mean, that kind of data-driven world, the speed, the pace, in addition to academic and scientific publication, I mean, there's really real issue for us to think about. So, and I will just open the floor because we probably have another 20 minutes, although I have my own questions, but I do have a lot of private time with Jeff, so I can ask himself during those times. So I open the floor, and maybe we'll have those audience here, and then we'll go back to Zoom to see whether there are any questions. So please, colleagues and students, do you have any questions to ask Jeff? Yeah. Right.
Simpler question. So you said that ChatGPT 3 took 7 years to come out?
Trained, yeah.
To be trained. So does that mean that all the computations of the language corpora took so long for the program to be trained?
Yes, yes. Although, like, the speed of computation, Moore's law, means they're not, they're working on 5 right now, and it's not going to take 7 years.
Okay.
And they can also use that information, but some of it gets dated over 7 years, of course, right? It's, you know, this is what my point, that like we need computation more than the physicists and the chemists of the 20th century, right? So that gap is going to go down and down and down and down. The other thing which I meant to mention but did not, which bears on that question, is disk space is essentially free to corporations and governments. It's so cheap to them relative to other things they're spending that like, even if as recent as 15 years ago or so, corporations would collect information on you and me, and then after a certain number of years would delete it and say, that's not commercially interesting to us anymore. Governments too. Now they save everything, forever. So disk storage is actually a big part of that equation too. So I don't know how long it's going to take to get 5, but I'm really interested in hearing when it comes out what that interval is, and I guarantee it's not going to be 7 years. I don't think I have the number for 4, but it's not terribly smaller than 7 years.
Yeah, I'm amazed that nobody, or at least, well, there will have been people who have seen it coming.
Yeah.
But that the general public didn't see it coming, and everybody was so surprised when it turned up in November 2022.
Yeah.
And everybody was really, oh, what is this?
Yeah.
Although they were busy creating this thing for 7 years.
Right. Yeah, you know, Silicon Valley's an unusual place in some regards, right? I can't imagine the other tech companies didn't know everything about the progression of that. Certainly the media didn't know, right? Which is strange. I don't want to insult any journalists, but you know, they report highly technical developments in a way that I wish there were more detail. That's the nicest version of that. Thanks. A good point.
Any other questions? Please. Yeah.
I have a question regarding the balance between the theory-driven and data-driven approach. So I major in psychology, and I think for most of the research in the social science domain, the typical logic flow is like we observe phenomenon and then use a theory. Based on the theory, then we have the hypothesis, and then we choose, say, analytic skills to analyze the data to see whether it fits or reject the hypothesis. Yeah. So during the analysis process, we can have some exact values regarding which factors is important or is essential or no use.
Yeah.
But I think for like most of the machine learning approach is treated like black box. So when we try to use some machine learning techniques to analyze our data, it seems that we have some input data, and then during the process, it output a model for prediction or classification without telling us the underlying mechanism or like,
that's the black box part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think during the process, we do not know the exact parameters for some variables. I know there are some machine learning techniques like the random forest or the decision trees. They are more interpretable.
Yeah.
But most of the others, they're not. So my question is that, do you think it is necessary to like theory-driven and data-driven approach, like we can have the theory to guide our coding process for the training data, or is it acceptable that we can change from the data-driven approach?
Yeah, that's a really interesting area right now. And I think I have to differentiate AI from machine learning here. So machine learning is not black box, okay? So I do work with lassos, if you know what those are, regularization tools. And you've got 1,000 variables and you want to run a regression, and it's going to pick the 7 best, right? Not on theory. And then I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, oh, I'm not sure about that. In fact, I have a paper that just came out which says I want to use a lasso, but I want to protect these 10 variables from being shrunk to 0 because these are important in my literature. They're holy in my, every literature has a set of regression variables that are holy, right? I'm sure you're thinking of yours right now. And so what if I protect those and then I let the lasso decide on the other 990 of them or whatever, right? And then I might get some surprises in there. The lasso has the same criteria as AI, which is the best possible prediction regardless. So if I use a regular lasso, it's gonna pick the best set of variables that for prediction without any theoretical regard. So I'm really with you on this because I actually wrote a paper about that. So for instance, if you just run a regular lasso, and let's say the outcome is predicting vote choice, okay, and it's only gonna decide on the numerical criteria of fit. So what if one of the variables was shoe size or eye color? And by putting shoe size in the regression model, it predicts better than when I leave shoe size out. Well, I got to tell my reviewers, readers, whatever, I really want shoe size in my voting model. And I'll invent some theory about that probably. No, that's a joke. But I agree with you. I really like procedures because I wrote one that balance theory, like variables in a regression model that are essential in a literature, or reviewers will drive to your house and beat you up, right? On the other hand, like AI is a very different, like big AI models, LLMs and whatnot, that's a really different game because I don't know what's inside a certain hidden layer. I mean, actually, that's not true. I can look at a hidden layer, but I have no idea what the context is. And to get context, like I mentioned, maybe I'll go out 1 forward and backwards. No, that's still not context. 2, 3, 4, a million, right? So classic machine learning, you mentioned random forest, you get to see how the soup is made, right? And that's great. And if I want to say, well, I'm just going to say shoe size, I don't know how to explain that to readers. But these other 3 variables that were surprise to me, they're going to stay in there, right? And the thing I like about like regularization tools is they tend to find combinations of variables that you theoretically wouldn't think about. And what they tend to be is these 3 or 4 variables as a unit do some interesting explaining power that one variable can't do, even if the other variables are theoretically more justified in the literature. That's only a partial answer to your question, I think. But I see there's a real difference in the 2 ways of thinking about that. And I had my little circles with, AI is this and machine learning is that. That's kind of, I think, how I would answer that question. I would never personally turn over like the whole process. That's why I believe in regularization tools that you have input in, right?
Okay, thank you.
Does that help?
Thank you so much. Yes,
Okay.
that's helpful.
That's probably a long-winded answer to a simple question, but.
Another questions from the online audience, which I will try to read out. Basically, I think it refers to from Dr. William Jung, and which is concerned about the curriculum design. Basically, I think the question is that now we have AI and all this, basically can deal with the hardware, and do we really need to really rethink about the curriculum design so that basically we can focus on other aspect instead of, I think maybe my understanding is the question is that now, like 50 years ago, you have the calculators. Do you still need maths and calculus and all this? I think, yeah. the question posed to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You certainly do need math and calculus to understand what they're doing, like I talked about. But here's the thing. I'll go back to the business school context. IBM comes to campus and they're going to interview people for jobs. They don't care if that person starts their job and they're using AI 50% of their day, or 10% of the day. They care about that person being as productive a worker as possible, particularly as a 22-year-old or whatever. They're not wound up the way we are about that being cheating on your essay, right? They want productive people using the latest tools, right? And every Fortune 500 company is going to be honest about that, right? We want people that have the latest, most important tools. They come to our company and they're as productive as possible. And that's why the business schools are on the forefront of that curriculum issue. Now, on the other hand, maybe there's a positive side, and this might be what the questioner was alluding to. Maybe it does open up the idea that we can put other things in our syllabi that we wouldn't have time for normally. I've never written a syllabus and said, I don't have enough stuff to put in here. It's always the other problem.
Yeah, any questions from the floor? Please, Ben.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very intriguing. I'm thinking about how human is going to evolve in the future. So you mentioned that we're in the fifth era of revolution.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, well, with the use of AI, will our future generation become more creative, or will our future generation rely too much on AI and kind of converge their thinking too much because they're going to rely on existing knowledge too much? So what's your view about this?
Well, I can't give you a definitive answer, but the advent of new technology in the history of humans has never made us less creative, ever. Now, you could say, well, this is different, but people probably said that before, right? My guess is it's going to make us more creative. We're going to do less grunt work, right? And I didn't mention it, but I meant to. There was a really interesting thing that happened in the 20th century that I forgot to say. Human lifespans increased 30 years on average from 1900 to 2000. That's unbelievable. Around the world, we had 30 years to do more stuff rather than plow fields, right? And things like that. So I'm not certain we're going to have another era like that. We might, right? Biomedicine being what it is. But I think a lot of the inventions in the 20th century were because we had that extra time, which was partly as a result of technology, right? Some of which were developed during the Industrial Revolution, right? So I'm cynical about a lot of things, which I mentioned, but this one I think I feel pretty good about. I don't think computers are ever going to be artistic in the way that we appreciate, even though like people use ChatGPT to make nice sunset pictures and everything like that. But think about like just in the art world, right? Like Picasso brought cubism to life, right? And that hadn't been done before in the history of art. I don't think we're going to invent a machine that will produce cubism, or dripping clocks, right? Dolly or whatever. So I'm actually feel good about that part. But that's a really interesting issue. So let's talk in 30 years.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Actually, I think Ben's question also remind me about, I mean, at least we heard from 10 years ago, Silicon Valleys are actually, they need philosophers. They want some sort of philosophers and artists in a way that, it seems that we think about technological development at the same time. Certain disciplines tend to benefit more than the others. Mm-hmm. And also there's always the question about, when everyone learn AI, and everyone, what's the comparative advantage of people, they can really stand out among their peers. Okay, and I think that certainly there are certain kind of factors, and just thinking from the academic perspective, we talk so much about the literature review part, but at the same time, I think there's always about certain kind of conceptualization. We still maybe differentiate some science and social science discipline, and there are certain kind of boundaries that exist. And I don't know, it's going to be, I mean, it's a big question, but I was just want to know your take on that, and so that, because I think your talk actually bring up to think about, right, I mean, how social science that can also really, in a way, advance certain kind of hurdles, but at the same time advance scientific knowledge like the science. I mean, they can easily communicate, although from very disciplined, because they have a lot of protocols, but also a lot of concepts they basically accumulate. So I think these are related questions.
Yeah. I mean, I work in the social sciences and the biomedical sciences, and I like to say I study humans when people ask me what I do. When you're studying humans, you're studying the hardest thing to study. So what we call the hard sciences are really the easy sciences. The natural sciences are not hard sciences. They really are not. They go to conferences, Ed, and they agree on like 90% of knowledge. You know, and they quibble about the 10%. I go to a political science conference and it's the other way around, right? And it's not because these are dumber people, it's because humans are really difficult to study. Everybody in the room knows that, right? I mean, humans lie, they drop out of studies, they take drugs, or they don't take drugs when you want them to, you know, or they obfuscate, you know, it goes on and on and on. They don't tell their doctor the truth about their habits, and it's because we are such hard things to study. So there's always going to be room to bring technology in. We don't have we sent men to the moon moment yet. Maybe a little bit there's some hints of it in biomedicine, like CRISPR, the tool that edits DNA. That's pretty revolutionary. It hasn't been fully exploited yet, but we don't have the sort of moments that the engineers, the physicists, and the chemists had in the 20th century. But I think we're going to. And so if you're young in these disciplines, it's a really exciting but challenging time, right? That's probably not a sufficient answer, but it's the best I can do.
Good to me, great to me. And we still have around 2 to 3 minutes. Any, yeah, please, obviously, yeah.
This question is probably more applicable to large language models and other forms of AI, but it appears that there is some evidence that the onus to add real-time search capabilities to LLMs is actually having a negative impact on the accuracy of the output.
Yeah.
And I read that recently OpenAI had entered into an arrangement with Reddit, and so now there will be all sorts of new kinds of text that theoretically could cause the LLMs to be producing output that is no longer what we would consider classically grammatically accurate. And also there are corners of the internet in which up to 90% of the texts are actually produced by AI. So what do these types of text and real-time search capabilities do to the advancement of the technology?
Yeah, that's a fascinating area, and it's not fully resolved in my mind. Yeah, there's vast amounts of AI-generated text are often of dubious quality. But I'm going to turn your question around a little bit because I have a project that I'm in the middle of right now. Because I think it bears on that question a little better than I just did. So our project is we're trying to use AI to discover racist terms that are used on the internet that are coded. And so at many of these sites, they use these terms that you and I haven't heard before, and they mean things that we wouldn't know necessarily. And so we have a real-time NLP process that crawls around these really awful, awful web pages, looking for terms that are unusual you know, that aren't contextually known to the AI. And it doesn't necessarily spit out a perfectly accurate list. So we have another part of the project where we have humans go through this and confirm that that is a coded term, or being used as a coded term. And then the AI helps us figure out what it means. So I'm not going to use the phrases because they can get really ugly. Anti-Semitic, racist language. But we have to have this human component that checks the AI component, or we're just being wrong too infrequently. And then we have another component where we're doing survey experiments to see where these terms are in their life cycle. So you may not have heard the term cultural Marxism. It's very US-centric. It started as a coded term for Jew, okay? And then it slowly became more and more discovered. Well, Senator Ted Cruz, in his book last year, used it in the title of the book. Okay, so it's definitely in a different lifespan now than it was. I think in that particular case, he's using it to talk to those people and say, hey, I'm kind of one of you. But he's also using it to talk to a wider audience in a different context, to make them afraid of Marxism occurring in the United States, which is, please. So like, we're kind of turning your question around in a way, right? We're being cynical about what's being produced by the NLP process that we created, right? And we're adding the human element. And these are students, right, that do this. And every time we have a meeting and students sitting around the table, I go, are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? Because it's a pretty ugly environment. And in fact, that's a great use for AI because I don't want to go there. That doesn't quite answer your question, but I think it sort of bears on that necessary trade-off that we have right now. If I missed the point entirely, tell me.
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like, at least for the time being, there's always necessity for humans in the loop.
Yeah.
Is kind of reassuring.
Yeah, we're not quite at Skynet, right? Fortunately. Sorry, movie reference.
No, I think we can end with that remark. And thanks so much for everyone's participation, of course, for Jack's fascinating talk. And I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion, of course. And also thank you for the online audience and actually, yeah, for staying behind and with us. Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.